Deep Sea Embers Chapter 181 to 190. Chapter 181 Inches History, Pollution, and the Black Sun. A message that suddenly appeared on the chronology pillar, a city-state that no one knew about, the battles that no one remembered, the defeats and sacrifices that no one saw, a history that did not exist in anyone's memory, and after its demise, there was only a trace of its existence left in the world. And even if the message amounted to nothing more than an extremely short sentence, it's likely at the cost of countless lives from those flame bearers to transmit this message. After listening to Morris's explanation, Duncan fell into deep thought due to the shock. He's got a general idea of what this faith did according to the flame codex he read. Unlike the Storm, Wisdom, and Death Church, the flame bearers followed a teaching that's much more ethereal and harder to grasp. It's history. History was the memory of civilization. If history becomes corrupted, so does the memory of civilization itself. When that occurs, even reality itself could be bent to the corruptor's will. Control history, control the world. To combat this threat, flame bearers are constantly working behind the scenes to fight against those who pose a threat. They are often forgotten, often never seen, and often perished within history itself. Nevertheless, their impact continues to be felt today in the form of everyday living. So who did they worship? The eternal flame, Ta Rujan, a giant who guards against the corruption of history, the embodiment of civilization's memory. According to the Flame Codex, the giant integrated the first flame created by mortals into its body. Through this flame, it records the correct history and grows with it in size, and once Ta Rujan grows big enough, he will be immune to corruption and safeguard history in its entirety. Of course, the origin story was nothing more than bullocks in Duncan's view. He wouldn't dismiss the flame bearers did work to combat the corruption of history, but the flame giant was a whole different matter. So they did something like that before already, Duncan muttered thoughtfully. What did you say? Morris didn't process the comment and asked, did what before already? What do you mean? Ads by PubFuture. It's nothing, just talking to myself. Duncan shook his head and met the old gent's gaze with a certain severity. The intel you brought is very important. The intel I brought? Morris now got really confused. You mean the message? The one that appeared on the flame bearer's pillar. Duncan nodded with a frown. But there's one thing I'm curious about. Did the Black Sun have the power to corrupt history? Morris hesitated, obviously unsure due to this not being within the scope of his expertise. I am not very clear about the authority of the Black Sun, which is probably only understood by those experts who specialize in fighting against evil gods. But as far as I know, the Black Sun should theoretically not have this ability. While Duncan nodded and continued to dwell on the issue with unease plastered all over his face, Morris took the time to observe the subspatial shadow sitting opposite of himself. This, Mr. Duncan, has always been polite and patient. He likes to discuss academic issues with me and ask questions from time to time, just like the last time I visited the antique shop. Now, he seems interested in the flame bearers and their mission of preserving history. But why though? Does he suspect someone's polluting history? Is this the reason why Lahem ordered me to get into contact with this being? What is his relationship with Lahem? What is his stance on the order of this world? Am I stuck in the middle of games between gods? The chaotic thoughts rose and fell in Morris's mind, forcing him to become more cautious in what he should do and what role he might be playing in this mission. In fact, Morris got this inkling sensation that Lahem was watching the conversation through him as an avatar right now. He didn't know why, but that's what he's getting. While the old gentleman was having wild thoughts, Duncan finally ended his musings and looked up, half curious and half lamenting. I say, those scientists have done so many bad things in the past. Doesn't anyone want to do something about them? Like eradicating the group. How can it be that easy to eliminate an evil god's faith? Morris subconsciously shook his head. Heretical beliefs are like mercury entering the body, pervasive and permeating. No matter how much they are eliminated, new ones will always be sprouting. In the end, the main source of the problem remains with the evil god. Until we remove the core of the problem, the branches that spawn from it will keep coming. As Morris explained, he sighed harder at the situation. Most individuals are good people at heart. They work hard and live to their fullest, but because of a single unexpected setback in their life, they would fall from grace and touch upon forbidden knowledge. You see, any ordinary citizen can become a heretic by donning the black robe of the evil gods. How can the authorities clean them out when you have an open invitation like that? Speaking of this, the old gentleman subconsciously glanced at Duncan again with a strange glint in his eyes. Ads by PubFuture. Why are you looking at me like that? Duncan appeared offended at the accusing look. With all due respect, Morris took a gentle breath and plucked up the courage, but shouldn't you know this all too well? About a mortal being corrupted. Spreading his arms out, Duncan shakes his head in denial. How am I supposed to know? I'm a law-abiding citizen. Even in my free time, I will report on the closest heretic to the authorities. Morris. The older man obviously didn't buy it and nearly choked. Not minding the accusation, Duncan figured he better shift the conversation back on track lest this spiral out of hand. But I understand what you mean. Unless we can directly target the evil god, their influence will never wane. However, something is bothering me. Is the Black Sun's influence really that strong? I've seen its lifeless state. Even when it communicated with me, it had to do it through a mental echo instead of speaking. How does a being that's so weak able to pollute the world? The corners of Morris's mouth visibly twitched. No matter how bad the state of the Black Sun is, it is only weak in your eye. Unfortunately, we, mortals, are not so durable. Duncan felt an indescribable urge to rebuttal that claim and say he's human too. However, he reconsidered the idea after taking the mental and physical health of the old historian into account. Besides, spouting something like that would only make him look weird and awkward when the other side already saw his true appearance. It's then Morris seemed to think of something else. After a pause, he added, but your doubts may also point to the crux of the matter. If the state of the Black Sun is really as bad as you say, his pollution of the world really shouldn't be so strong. At least it shouldn't make the scientists this tricky to handle. All this may perhaps have something to do with the existence of those sun heirs. The offsprings of the sun, muttered Duncan thoughtfully. His mind couldn't help but think of the tall, thin black shadow that had appeared in Shirley's dream before. Although there was no clear evidence, he always felt that the thing was probably related to the legendary sun offsprings. The Black Sun has long fallen and can no longer shine on this world, but the heirs of the Black Sun continue to this day. If there's any power causing the influence, it would be the next of kin. But another key problem remains unsolved. The Black Sun doesn't have the power to pollute history, and its descendants most certainly couldn't. Yet, the forgotten city-state of Wilhelm did send a message that the Black Sun has returned from history. That meant history has been polluted at least once. In that case, who's helping the scientists to resurrect their god? Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 183 Inches The Invasion After Nightfall. Did the teacher just leave? Nina came to the first floor and immediately moped after finding Morris had left. Why didn't you ask him to stay, uncle? The weather is so bad, and you still let teacher leave. Any later and it will get dark, Duncan casually said as he turned to lock the door. Then walking over to the stairs, he drove over so a little rain won't hinder him anyways. But teacher doesn't seem to be feeling well, Nina protested as she went upstairs. He should have rested a little longer. Duncan contemplated the idea, thinking that if the old man really rested here for a while then he might have felt even worse. But he couldn't explain it to Nina, so he could only say a few pointless words to fiddle through the subject. Once inside the kitchen, the pair quickly seated themselves for dinner. Nina had prepared beet soup, toast, vegetable rolls, and sliced ham. Clearly, the assortment was meant for more than one person. If we can't finish then save the leftovers for the morning, Nina muttered, then looked up at Duncan curiously. What did you tell teacher? I couldn't hear your conversation while upstairs, but the noise was quite lively. Duncan eyed Nina's lively appearance. As always, she's bright, happy, and full of life without an ounce of negative air. No matter how he looked at her, there's no hint of a supernatural entity possessing the girl. Sun fragment, what exactly is that thing? Duncan originally thought the item was something tangible, but now, it appears he's jumped to conclusions. Whatever the sun fragment was, it's slumbering inside Nina's body. Uncle Duncan. Nina noticed the weird gaze coming from across the table and squirmed uncomfortably. Is there something stuck on my face? No, nothing. Duncan shook his head and decided to change the topic by ripping a piece of bread. By the way, have you been feeling any discomfort lately? That weird dream from before, did you re-encounter it? No. Nina waved her hand. I stopped having that weird dream after Miss Heidi gave me that therapy session. I'm feeling full of energy every day. Ads by PubFuture. She paused, then looked at Duncan a little worriedly. Uncle, what's wrong? Why do I suddenly feel like you're acting weird? Did you and Mr. Morris talk about it? Can't be about my last exam grade. No, don't get weird thoughts. Your teacher didn't visit just to complain about your grades. Eat first. Nina nods and readily agrees since she's not going to be lectured. She could see something was bothering her uncle but didn't know what. Comma. In the lower city, deep in the dilapidated and dim alleys, the hastily lit gas lamps finally dispelled the surrounding darkness before night completely enveloped these streets. Under this condition, Shirley lay next to the windowsill and stared out into the dark streets with fascination. You're looking outside again. What's there to see? Dog's voice sounded from the side as the chains connecting the pair rattled due to the movement. I can't sleep because it's early, and there's nothing to do. It's boring, Shirley muttered. Do you want to go out tomorrow and continue to make trouble for those cultists? No, I doubt we will get anything out of it. Shirley shook her head after thinking about the idea. I don't know if the church people really improved their skills, but the cultists in the city seem to have been cleaned out recently. I can't even smell their stench. The Suntists are indeed mostly gone. Maybe they really have been caught by the authorities. Dog leaned over and lazily lay at Shirley's feet, but I don't think you're like this because you're bored. Shirley suddenly rolled her eyes. Then what else could it be? Are you thinking about that side? Dog raised his head, the shimmering red light flickering from his hollow eye sockets, thinking about that warm home, the bright room, and the hot meal. You miss how someone is willing to wake you up in the morning for breakfast, and maybe you miss spending time with that Nina. Or perhaps, you're thinking about him. XXX shut up. You're so annoying. Shirley tugged the chain with her right arm and rudely interrupted Dog. I'm not a crying little baby anymore. How can I be so weak? Dog didn't care about Shirley's rough reaction. Longing for light and warmth is not a weakness. It only proves that you are still human. Ads by PubFuture. Shirley suddenly froze, followed by a look of disgust. Why are you XXX acting so mushy with me all of a sudden? You're sounding all scholarly as well. I'm still human. Are you praising me or insulting me by saying I haven't grown bigger after so many years? Don't think that after fusing with me that you're actually a demon yourself. There is nothing wrong with admitting your human side. Dog shook his ugly head. Besides, don't forget, it's not just this chain that connects me to you. I can feel any emotional changes you experience, remember? Shut up. Shirley turned her face away like she's irritated at being read like an open book. You don't have to keep pressing me like this. If you do, I will really go visit Nina tomorrow and bring you along. I'm sure Mr. Duncan will have fun talking with you until you wet your bones. Dog finally stopped talking, which only roused another light kick from the girl at the awkward silence. Quit fretting about me. I have you, don't I? Shirley teased. You're mushier than me when you start. Dog moved away and caused the chains to rattle. Any more and I might vomit. Then there's going to be a new hole in the floor from the acid. Despite their innocent quibbling, the pair obviously enjoyed each other's company, especially Shirley, who was feeling slightly down from having her life scrambled recently. It's good like this. Everything is back on track, and everyone can go back to their lives like before. That warm and peaceful place isn't for you, Shirley. It doesn't belong to you and is dangerous. After comforting herself, Shirley heaved a soft sigh to only freeze in the next second. She sensed something, an ominous and dark-natured presence that's fast approaching. It's sending her alarm bells ringing. Dog also jerked up from his position and took an aggressive stance toward the darkness inside the house. He's vigilant and ready to strike at anyone or anything that might pop out. Due to the need to save money, most of the rooms here were dark due to Shirley turning off the oil lamp on the table. Usually, this wouldn't be an issue since the light from the street lights would faintly spill over and hit the window. Unfortunately, that seems to have been a mistake tonight. Foulness had started to ooze from the cracks in the walls. Dog. Shirley subconsciously tightened the chain in her hand. I know. Dog lets out a low growl simultaneously. I'm watching. Something is coming. They're surrounding us. Brewer. What the hell are these things? My eyes are going blurry. Before the words from the dark hound could finish, Shirley had noticed the faint light from the street lamps warping and disappearing as if a thick layer of fog had barricaded this room from the outside. Sure enough, even the picture from the window had disappeared, replaced by a murky darkness of swirling nothingness. Once completely isolated, the shadows finally pierced through and converged into several figures opposite of the two occupants inside. They were dressed in tattered black robes that exposed their thin, wood-like arms, and their waists hung a pitch-black Bible that seemed to be drenched in a suspicious dark liquid that's constantly dripping. But that's not all though. On each of their chest hung a spiked iron emblem that embodied a pale and creepy white flame. Thou shalt perish. The leading black robe raised a finger and pointed it to the stunned-looking girl in the room. 4x he's an Ender missionary. Dog's exclaiming cry was so loud that it knocked Shirley straight back to reality. Chapter 184 inches the final attack of the Ender missionaries. The roar of Dog's broken recorder voice exploded like thunder, echoing in the dilapidated hut and shocking the assailants by sheer magnitude of its shockwave. Then in the following second, something even more shocking occurred, with Shirley flipping the chain and pulling the dark hound into her hand to commit a meteoric smash at the nearest Ender. The girl actually didn't know much about these Ender missionaries and only had vague idea that they're cultists. However, what she did know told her they're crazier and more extreme than the Suntists by worshipping subspace itself. As to why they're here for her, Shirley honestly didn't have a clue. But it didn't matter. If they want to fight, then so be it. The huge dark hound whizzed through the air like a cannonball and instantly smashed into the nearest Ender. After the muffled sound of flesh and blood colliding with bones spilled into the air, the attacker flew out and crashed into the nearest wall, making an audible splat at impact. Not missing this chance, Shirley promptly pulled the chain back and dragged Dog back to her side and swung at another. Sadly, a sneak only works if it's done without the foe knowing. In the ensuing fight, the black robes scattered and avoided further damage. They obviously had more combat experience than those grunts from the Suntist. Thou shalt perish. One of the black hoods point and shout at Shirley after narrowly scraping past Dog's skeletal head. How about you eat my XXX meteor hammer? Shirley was extremely irritable at the moment and wanted nothing less than smashing the foe into mush. The girl did just that by taking another swing with a more focused attempt. However, it's through these new swings of her weapon that she noticed something terribly wrong with her body. Ads by PubFuture. Shirley felt tired, not in a severe manner, but the exhaustion did start to get noticeable. Not only that, there's also a strange buzzing sound plaguing her head, causing the girl to grow irate and urge to charge at the enemy regardless of the cost to her own safety. My brothers and sisters, the curse of flesh and blood will not take us. The first Ender that had taken a direct hit suddenly cried out with a chant. His body had started to make a hair-raising crunching sound from the ground as if the bones were being bent and snapped while he crawled up. Then, as if blessed by the divine prayer, the surrounding Enders all stopped their evasive maneuvers and raised their arms in worship. The way they're behaving was no different from someone gaining infinite courage and strength. This shocked Shirley because she was witnessing the changes of these freaks in real time. Their skinny figures had begun to expand, twist, and crunch from being bent and extended. First it was the arms that grew longer with the nails turning into Wolverine-like claws. Then secondly, those legs had bent into an animalistic shape, similar to Dog's back hind legs to give it more jumping power. Lastly, that face had turned feral with vampiric fangs that extended past the lips. They're truly more beast than man at this point. What kind of thing is this 4X? Of course, Shirley did not sit around to let them finish their transformation. Almost simultaneous to their change, the girl had flung her chain in a wide-arcing whip at the nearest foe. It made a perfect hit, fracturing bone and snapping tendon at the impact. Although the Ender in question wasn't killed on the spot, it did interrupt this one's mutation, meaning one less foe to deal with afterward. Unfortunately, the drain on her strength had also increased, as well as the urge to violently charge and die with the enemy. These Enders are crazy 4X who voluntarily embraced subspace. Both their words and presence are carriers of pollution. Dog's unprecedented impatience suddenly sounded in Shirley's mind. Don't let them continue their prayer. Smash whichever bastard that speaks. And don't look them in the eye. Between the electrifying moment of life and death, a cold glint suddenly shot out from the edge of Shirley's peripheral vision. She instinctively wanted to dodge, but the bone spear came way too fast and stabbed her right in the arm. This directly hindered the girl's ability to swing the chain and counterattack, which only got worse by the ever-increasing drain on her stamina. Taking advantage of this opening, another Ender spread open his arms again and chanted a vicious prayer, "Thou shalt not heal." Bang! Ads by PubFuture. Get lost you 4X. Shirley rounded the crazed bastard's head with Dog's own skull, causing a huge splat of brain and blood to smear across the nearest wall. But then in the succeeding exchange, a sharp stinging pain speared into the girl's back and made her hiss. A spike made of pure bone had stabbed straight in from Shirley's back and out through her chest. If the girl's body hadn't been toughened up by Dog's demonic symbiosis, she would have surely died right on the spot. Still, Shirley's body didn't fall and involuntarily stumbled forward instead. Alarmed and horrified, Dog promptly got in front of his partner to block the attackers who wanted to pursue, opening his mouth to spew a blast of corrosive black acid. This forced the Enders to back off, leaving Shirley to lean in against the nearest wall for support. But that didn't matter for the enemy. The contamination was done on their part. Although a shadow demon's ability to resist corruption was high, Shirley was still mortal at her core. First, the muscle tissues would convulse and lose control, then it would be her mind's awareness until everything turns to darkness. 4X with so much effort, I only killed 3 of them. Shirley spat the excess blood and groaned at her pitiful state. It's not bad already, came Dog's equally pained and sluggish grunt. As the first line of defense for Shirley, the Dark Hound's condition was far more severe and effective. These Enders are priest-level bastards, not the rabbles we mowed down in the basement of those Suntist gatherings. Us fighting them is equivalent to sieging the Storm Cathedral. It's not a loss at all. What XXX not a loss? They're a bunch of adults beating a harmless little girl and her dog. They're shameless bastards that only knows how to fight with numbers. Shirley still wanted to beat the enemies to a pulp if she could. There were 3 Enders still standing in the room. All of them had turned into bloody deformed monsters that's more beast than man. And like a hunter to a prey, they most certainly wouldn't respond to Shirley's taunt. "No, vel, be, in .c ohm." Knowing her words were useless, Shirley looked around the wrecked-up home with a sad face. The table got flipped, the cabinet smashed, her few pieces of clothes now ruined. Even the oil lamp, which was the only valuable piece of item in the home, was now destroyed. I only had this much and you've destroyed it all. Shirley deflated at seeing her only possessions ruined. Sliding down painfully against the wall, the girl started to tear up and sob. "Bastards, I'll make sure to pummel you all bloody later." No answer came though, only a volley of bone spikes. Then, everyone slowed to a crawl as the projectiles flickered with phantom images in midair. A ball of green flame had suddenly materialized in the middle of the room, putting up a wall between the girl and her assailants. Our fighters are at war with the enemy, teleportation successful. From the intrusion came a hideous undead bird and a shrill voice that sounded oddly familiar. Chapter 185 Inches safe and sound. The undead bird circled around the room before blowing up a vortex of flame with her body. Through this ethereal door, Duncan stepped through and came before Shirley. "I remember telling you to ask for help when you were in trouble." Duncan lowered his head and quietly spoke to the girl covered in blood. "Why didn't you look for me?" I forgot." Shirley blinked, feeling a sense of relief as the buzzing noise evaporated from her head. Then showing a tangled expression, "I was very confused just now. That's right, these guys won't stop screeching in my ear with their weird prayers. It made me all dizzy." Slowly turning to glance at the attackers frozen in stasis, Duncan could fault the girl for losing her cool. It's the first time he had seen something this strange as well. They're more beast than human at this point. If not for the tattered clothes on their body, Duncan had every reason to believe they were actual monsters from a horror flick. Then Duncan frowned after recalling another detail. Were they the ones who hit you? Where did they all come from? They hit me, Shirley immediately proclaimed like a distraught child running home to tell her parents. It's weird, but that reaction came to her out of reflex. I don't know where they came from. Dog said they're Ender missionaries, the crazy bastards that worship subspace. Ender missionaries, people who worship subspace. Duncan didn't expect an encounter like this on a random night. Looking over to I, who's still flying around the room, don't zap them yet. As he ordered, the few surviving Enders had already shown signs of being erased by I's powers in how they're flickering like a shoddy TV signal. The network is connected. The network is connected. I flutters back to reality and lands on Duncan's shoulder, her beak pecking the ghost captain in protest of interrupted work. All right, I get it. More fries for you later. First, send them to the ship instead. Duncan nodded to the Dove. I'll pick them up on deck over there. Mission accomplished. Mission accomplished. Giddy with joy, I took to the air with hurricane speed and swept the Enders up with a green vortex that instantly spirited them away. Shirley was stunned to see what was happening in front of her. In fact, the battle ended so abruptly and strangely that it didn't feel real at all. Ads by PubFuture. Mr. Duncan didn't make a move at all. In fact, the man didn't care what tricks or special curses the Enders had from beginning to end. He just showed up here, and then, as if he had a slight interest in the group, he plucked them away like someone casually picking up a stone from the roadside. He may not have even realized that those cultists have combat power. How is your injury? At this moment, Duncan's voice suddenly came, interrupting Shirley's cranky thoughts. XXX, it hurts like hell. She grinned and waved at the guy, only to have her wound pulled and relapse into pain. Duncan made a concerned face. Do you want me to take you to the hospital? Don't. Shirley cried out instantly. I don't have any money. Duncan was dumbfounded. Is this a time to worry about money? You're already in that state. I didn't finish. Shirley finally sat up after much struggle. My physique is different from ordinary people's. I will definitely be discovered when I go to the hospital. If I attract the church's attention, I won't be able to explain it. You see. The girl raised her right arm to show Duncan the healing wound. After the curse was dispelled, the healing ability returned and quickly closed the gash. As for the heaviest injury on her back, it's healing too, but slowly and hurts like hell. As long as those Enders stop yapping, then I'm not afraid of them. Shirley glances down at the blood soaking her dress. They wouldn't have stood a chance otherwise. It hurts so much. A slight crackling sound suddenly came from nearby, interrupting Shirley's muttering. She and Duncan followed the noise simultaneously and found it's coming from one of the corpses in the room. The body had already been deformed and mutilated, but the grayish-white smoke fuming out of the corpse was alarming. Imagine a burning ember crackling and turning red from the heat. That's exactly what's happening to this corpse. Before they knew it, the entire body had disintegrated into a pile of ash before suddenly sinking into a black hole that manifested on the ground. The Enders dedicated themselves to subspace, and now it is their time to pay that price. Dog's hoarse voice answered the question from the side. Not even their ash will remain in this world. Ads by PubFuture. At least they're environmental when they die. No one has to clean up after them like the mess made by those scientists. Duncan throws out his thought without considering how poor of a joke his sentence was. Then looking down at the palish-looking Shirley, are you feeling better now? If you are, come with me. After he said that, a cluster of dark green flames emerged out of thin air. Go with you. Shirley took a second to grasp the meaning. Where to? You're not going to spend the night here today, are you? Duncan raised his finger and pointed to the mess in the room. Do you think this place can still be inhabited? Shirley looked around the hut that she and Dog called home for many years. Everywhere she looked, it's smashed furniture and debris from the fighting. There's nothing of value left in this place. The girl didn't say anything for a while and only glumly looked down at the ground. The patrolling guardians don't seem to have noticed the commotion here. We can still pack your things if you want, Duncan sighed. He knew Shirley's mood couldn't be good, but there was nothing he could say to comfort her. But regardless, you can't stay here anymore. Even if you don't mind the broken furniture, we don't know if those enders will revisit this place. You're a target to them now. Duncan didn't have the heart to continue. He knows Shirley was a child that's far more mature for her age due to the harsh environments she grew up in. We'll pack some stuff, Shirley said sullenly. No, vel, be, in c ohm. Need help? Duncan asked. No need, Shirley shook her head, I have, very little. Indeed, the girl had very little to pack. Duncan only waited for a short while before Shirley finished the task. A small tin box for carrying, a rag doll, and a few tattered clothes she had salvaged from the former closet. We're taking all these, so we're not coming back in the future. Dog peeks up at the small tin box and sullenly asks, which doesn't get a response at all. Duncan knew he had to do something now after hearing that. Coming over to Shirley's side, he lowered himself to eye level and patted the girl's head in a comforting manner. Let's go home. A green fireball promptly shot out of the old-looking hut and soared through the night sky. Its destination, Duncan's antique shop. A world that's rushing towards a dark ending. Enslaved traveler that yearns for his freedom. A fire that will consume anyone who stays behind. Will he be able to break the chains that bound him and reach the peak, or will he just die like a sheep waiting to be slaughtered? Watch him rise from the bottom and tries to discover why he came here. To save the world or rush it to that dark ending. This is a story of a traveler. Chapter 186 inches local products from the city-state. On the first floor of the antique shop, Nina sat anxiously in a chair next to the counter. From time to time, she would get up and peer out the window, searching through the empty streets with those eyes for signs of her uncle. Oh, how can Uncle be like this? Why did he go out so late into the night? There's a curfew out. Nina sat back down and moped. If the guardians on patrol find out, he will definitely be detained again. That's already not the first time she's muttering to herself like this. But then, the slight sound of movement came from the door, followed by the doorknob turning. Nina perked up immediately, looking up in the direction of the entrance with anticipation. Sure enough, the familiar figure had come into her view. Nina, I'm back, Duncan said as he met his niece's gaze with a smile. See, I'm not too late. Nina practically threw herself at Duncan's chest as she complained, it's not too late. What time is it? Do you know how dangerous it is to go out past curfew? You just suddenly got up and said you're going out. You left me home alone. The girl's chattering complaints came out like a storm on the sea, forceful and continuous. However, her barrage swiftly halted after noticing the small figure hiding behind Duncan's leg. Shirley, carrying the small tin box, had peeked out with her head and waved at Nina nervously. Nina, it's me. Relieved that he's found an opening, Duncan promptly closed the door behind them and slid to the side so the girls could speak. Shirley, why are you here so late with Uncle? Wait, how come there's so much blood on you? Nina's eyes widen in shock at the terrible state of her friend. Don't worry, Shirley hurriedly waved her hand to indicate it's nothing. Although the injury on her back hasn't completely healed yet, she still tries to portray a bright smile. I encountered a small little problem. I'm perfectly fine. That's not a small problem at all. Nina hurriedly took the small box from Shirley's hand and carefully examined the blood stains on the girl's body. Growing shocked at the number of wounds. You got so many injuries, we must find a doctor quickly. I'm really okay. But, calm down. Shirley quickly grabbed Nina's hand and showed a helpless expression. Have you forgotten I'm not an ordinary person? Ads by PubFuture. Nina wanted to say something, but her attention was interrupted by Duncan's following cough. Ahem. Duncan interrupted the increasingly chaotic communication between the two girls. Don't ask so much, Nina. Shirley's injury shouldn't be a problem. Go take her upstairs and shower and change out of her clothes. I'll explain the specifics later. Nina's gaze flickered between the two before the girl nodded in confusion. Meanwhile, Shirley was rubbing her stomach with a flushed face. Is there anything to eat? I'm really hungry. Normally Shirley wouldn't have such a craving in the middle of the night, but perhaps it's due to the effect of her rapid recovery. She's feeling empty in the belly and drastically needs sustenance. Yes. Nina took a second to respond, but once she did, she promptly got to work. I overcooked today so there's still plenty of leftover from dinner. I'll go warm it up. Quickly running up the stairs, Nina's footsteps soon faded away from their ears as Shirley stood at the doorstep with a stunned face. She turned left and right, then up and down to see the familiar shelves, the familiar merchandise, and the smiling Mr. Duncan. I'm back again, Shirley mutters softly after accepting this was her home from now on. Yes, you're back, Duncan smiled and bent down to pick up Shirley's small tin box. We'd better discuss how to explain your injuries while we have the chance now. We also need to come up with a reasonable excuse to have you stay here permanently. But don't fret about it. I believe Nina would love that arrangement so you don't have to worry about her opinion. It took a good second for Shirley to realize what just happened with her possession. It's okay, I can do it myself. Meanwhile on the Vanished, Duncan, the infamous ghost captain, was staring at the three surviving Enders. They still hadn't regained consciousness, but the monstrous form they took had started to revert back to their human state. These twisted guys can become normal people again. Suddenly, a series of light footsteps rushed over from the rear. Alice was crying out happily in her gothic dress. Captain, I just heard Mr. Goathead say you were sending something to the deck again. You bought more things from the city. Alice came to a jerking halt halfway through her sentence. Whatever excitement she showed had turned into puzzlement. Captain, is this also a native product of the human city? Ads by PubFuture. Sort of, Duncan thought for a moment and shrugged. I haven't encountered anything like them before at least. They like to pop up in the city-state like sprouts during the spring season. N-O-V-E in .com. Alice nodded in confusion, then scratched her hair again with even more confused. She didn't know what the man meant by sprouts growing during spring because she's never seen it. They should be human, right? The puppet muttered. Captain, what are you doing with 3 of these things? You probably didn't buy them, right? I didn't buy them. I picked them up from the roadside. Duncan casually coped with the fragmented thinking of the puppet while also paying attention to the 3 subspace believers who had almost completely returned to their human form. It seems that I's teleportation process is as reliable as ever. So, does this mean I can use I to transport ordinary people to the ship in the future? Duncan contemplated the idea's feasibility and gradually grew happy at the other possibilities this opened. Aside from testing I's ability, Duncan had other plans in mind for other projects. Like what the Vanished's environment would do to others and what Alice's guillotine ability would do to living people if they got into contact now. What other better test subjects were there than these cultists, who just happened to drop into his lap tonight? He could only thank nature for the plentiful gifts he's gotten. While Duncan relishing at the good harvest, one of the Enders finally showed some movement. First, it was a slight twitch, then came the groan from the one that sat up. You're awake, the gentle voice mixed in with the sea breeze stimulated the nerves of the alienated captive. Here is, the cultist slowly turned his head, finding Duncan and Alice already staring down at him. Due to the sluggishness of his brain, the guy had to take a second to process the image, but once he did, the hostility instantly showed. Who are you? Oh right, you haven't seen me before, Duncan laughed as he watched the other 2 Enders slowly recover as well. Welcome to the Vanished. You can call me Captain Duncan. The Vanished. The first cultist was stunned because he obviously knew the name. This is the ghost ship that returned from subspace. That's right, it seems that you understand the situation, then our communication will be simple. Duncan nodded. First of all, I have some questions. His words did not get far because the cultist opposite to him had already raised both hands into the air, those eyes filled with ecstasy and madness. With a loud shout, "Oh subspace! You have finally opened the door to me and the others. Eternal life in the last days. Redemption in disaster. Annihilation for rejuvenation. The Ark of Promise has come. The Ark of Promise has come." Duncan's face visibly twitched after that proclamation. What illness does this cultist have in his brain? Chapter 187 Inches Ender Missionaries. The newly awakened subspace believers fell into an inexplicable state of ecstasy after learning they were on the Vanished. It's so wild that they even scared Alice with their fanatical behavior. Fortunately, Miss Doll had kept those hands on her head during this so that part didn't fall off like usual. The souvenirs this time are so scary. Miss Dahl stared and kept hiding behind Duncan. What's wrong with him? How would Duncan know? He hasn't even finished asking this yet. Immediately afterward, the other two final Enders also woke up, and after they figured out the current situation, they fell into the same ecstasy as the first person. They began to yell frantically, saying stuff like the promised ark. The gatekeeper of the subspace has come. Regardless of what Duncan and Alice said next to them, they remained unable to communicate. But by this time, Duncan had vaguely guessed the reason why these Enders fell into ecstasy. The Vanished was a ghost ship that returned from subspace. In the eyes of such madmen, the Vanished was likely a miracle. But isn't this fanatical energy a little too much? The three cultists kept hugging each other, both crying and laughing simultaneously. On occasion, they would even say something that should have been impossible to produce with a human throat before kissing and licking the deck. Their last action annoyed Alice, who was watching the excitement from the side. Without delay, Miss Dahl grabbed the nearest mop and smashed one of the cultists' head. I just washed the deck. Alice's fury did not go unnoticed. The two buckets and mops nearby also got into action and started to beat the fanatical lunatics on their own accord. Before long, the rowdy ruckus of mops and buckets was flying all over the deck. Ads by PubFuture. Duncan naturally became stunned as he watched this weird and chaotic scene. He knew Alice had built a good relationship with the items on the Vanished, but he didn't expect her one battle cry would be enough to raise an army. She's absolutely a boss with a bunch of henchmen. Stop. He stepped forward and ordered before this farce got out of hand. The buckets and mops stopped, leaving only Alice to continue with a mop in hand. It's only after she gave one last kick before she huffed indignantly and walked away. I just washed the deck, and now it's dirty from all their licking. Although I also think their action is a little disgusting, we still shouldn't do this. Duncan glanced at the doll helplessly and turned his attention back to the few cultists who had just been beaten to a pulp. Calm down yet. Despite the beatings they just endured, the Enders did not flinch in the slightest and were still energetic with their creepy grin. For individuals with such thin and scrawny bodies, they sure have an astonishing level of tolerance for pain. Haha, gatekeeper of the promised land, ghost captain at the helm, navigator of the ark. The first Ender to regain consciousness seems to have come back to reality and spoke. I can see your heart. How sad. You have received the greatest blessing, yet you rejected his gift. You had the right to enter the promised land, but you rejected it. You fool. Duncan slightly frowned while Alice immediately came over from the side. Captain, do you want me to beat him up again? The bucket and mop next to her also jumped over and swayed behind Alice to support the idea. All of you just behave over there for now. Duncan shooed them to the side and focused back on the Ender. It sounds like you know me very well since you called me the ghost captain. Subspace whispered your name, whispered your foolish refusal. The cultist grinned as the blood trickled down the corner of his mouth. You have the qualifications to be the most blessed being. Why did you have to flee? Don't you know that subspace is the eternal and ultimate destination of all things? You've reached the end, so why did you turn back when you reached the end? Ads by PubFuture. Duncan just quietly stared at this fanatic with an unwavering expression. However, his heart wasn't so calm though. Instead, it's rising up and down like a tidal wave at the information he's just heard. This group of fanatics knows a lot. Perhaps, they might even be right in some parts of their religion, and he mentioned Captain Duncan escaping from subspace. Rejecting the blessing. Could it be, the real Captain Duncan actually didn't fall into madness and escaped at the last moment? So the rumors were wrong. If that's the case, when did the real Duncan lose his mind and die? Duncan suddenly remembered the goat head's attitude towards subspace, wary, resistant, and faintly unnerved. This seems to confirm what this Ender mentioned about the great escape from subspace. Afterward, the Ender fell back into a daze, muttering something that couldn't be understood and laughing wildly in the next. As for the other two captives, they never regained their sanity to begin with. This told Duncan he would have a hard time talking with these individuals. Likely even harder than the Suntists. Is it because of the influence of subspace? Or did they actively destroy their sanity to embrace subspace? After getting no further response for a while, Duncan figured he had to take the initiative and provoke a reaction. Why did you attack Shirley? Sure enough, the three cultists reacted to the question. One of them raised their head in confusion and began swaying as he answered, "Attack." "Attack whom?" "No, vel, b, jn. C. ohm." "What you just did." Duncan's voice was cold and heavy. "You attacked a girl with a hound. Why did you attack her?" "The attack, attack," the confused fanatic suddenly started to shout. "We are merely setting everything back on track so that the correct history can progress smoothly. Loopholes, flaws, a little hidden danger. Hidden dangers must be ruled out. She should have died in the correct history. As long as she lives, loopholes will continue to sprout. The correct history." Listening to the crazy nonsense of these cultists was definitely having an effect on Duncan's brainpower. Nevertheless, he's able to capture the key detail and press for more. There is a problem with the historical line of planned. Were you people responsible for it? Something went wrong. No problem. No problem at all. We're just getting everything back on track. The madman raised his face with martyrdom in his eyes. The world should get back on track. The fate of destruction has been postponed for too long, and everyone has rebelled against the gift from subspace, against the destiny that should have come. We are correcting history to the right trajectory. Correct history to the right trajectory. The other two Enders began to shout feverishly as if being infected by their peers' worship. Only when we return to the right history line will everything be destroyed. Through the end comes renewal. Subspace will devour everything, and subspace will reshape everything anew. The fire has been extinguished, but the embers are ready for ignition. Only by lighting a second bonfire can the world survive in that gift. Chapter 188 Inches the Crazy Man. The clues seem to have all connected now. There are traces of pollution in the history of planned, distorted and closed space-time junction points in the chapel of the sixth block, and a subspatial rift hidden in the statue head of the storm goddess. Shirley was one of those who remembers the fire from that year. She should have died like everyone else when it burned, but she merged with a dark hound and survived. As a result, the girl escaped the historical pollution and retained her true memory. Now, a group of Enders has attacked Shirley to correct the flawed loophole. Of course, Duncan wouldn't believe the absurd truth from their mouths, and even listening to their crap about correcting history was only to lure out more information. However, there's one thing he's certain of. These fanatical Enders are definitely the culprits behind the whole false history. But not all problems have been explained yet though. How did these madmen suddenly discover Shirley's loophole? What does historical pollution have to do with the Black Sun, and what role did that sun god play in this matter? And most importantly, will Nina, the carrier of a suspected solar fragment, also be targeted by these cultists? Duncan observed the three crazy fanatics with cold eyes as he raised a finger. A cluster of green flame ignited upon one of the Enders. This flame burned the cultist's body, which could be regarded as a transcendent object, causing him to curl up in agony as he screamed. This also had the direct effect of silencing the other two cultists. Ads by PubFuture. Fire. Blasphemous fire. The cultist's eyes widened with a fanatical frenzy crazier than before. This subspace follower, who never showed fear before, had finally learned what terror meant. Blasphemy, blasphemy, oh blasphemy. If you don't want to get burned then cooperate with my questioning. Duncan orders the flames to ignite all over the deck, intertwining into a web of flame to surround the three cultists. Answer me, how exactly did you people pollute history? Did it start in the sixth block? We are putting history back on track. Even though they were intimidated by the ghost flames, the Enders did not forget to retort and even shouted defiantly, the sixth block was just a failed attempt. But that's nothing. The sixth block was just a failed attempt. Duncan immediately frowned at this word. The other party did not answer honestly but still revealed some vital information. First of all, the fire that year was indeed the doings of this group of subspace fanatics. It wasn't simply a fire caused by the sun fragment as he had thought at the beginning. Secondly, these cultists' attempts to pollute history did not seem to have gone as intended, or at least not yield the full result they wanted. Immediately after that, he thought of another key year number, 1885. Vanna found the number under the chapel, pointing to the year when the nun died in battle. So in theory, it should also be the year when the church was invaded by subspace forces. Then there's the 1889 Great Fire. Between the initial corruption and the outbreak, there's a 4-year gap in between. It took that much time for the Enders to produce that failed attempt. Things are starting to make sense for him with a clear picture of the truth. You actually failed twice, Duncan said, gazing down at the Ender, who was being burned by the ghostly flames. In 1885, you guys invaded a chapel and tried to use it as an anchor point to spread the pollution of history, but a nun ruined your plans with her life, sealing up both that year's invasion and her own death in the underground church. 4 years later, in 1889, you carried out a second plan to create a fire in the 6th block where the chapel is located, trying to blanket reality with a historical branch of the city-state being engulfed by a huge fire. But that failed as well because an unknown force erased that reality. It did not continue to burn. Ads by PubFuture. Then you guys lurked in the city to this today, looking for an opportunity to continue the plan until you discovered Shirley's loophole. You believed the plan's failure back then was related to her survival, so you wanted to get rid of this hidden danger first, correct? Instead of answering or lashing at Duncan's speculation or truth, the burning Ender only made a creepy grin under that intense searing pain. You don't have to answer. I can see the answer in your eyes, the resentment, which means I'm right. Duncan didn't care about the other person's provocation and calmly continued, next question, what is the connection between you and that black sun? The fire of 1889 was sparked by a sun fragment, you made that fragment. The Enders remained silent and didn't answer. Duncan became even more forceful and spread his flame onto the other 2 Enders. He watched as they curled up and twitched from the pain that could burn even their souls. NOVEL-BJN.C. If you won't speak then I can only guess, Duncan sighed, waving his hand to disperse the flames. He had realized that this simple torturing method wouldn't work on these subspace fanatics. Their spirits and flesh are no longer human, meaning the simple definition of pain no longer applies to them. I guess you have some sort of cooperation with those Suntists. No wait, maybe there is a partnership with the heirs of the sun. They promised your group something in return for the collaboration. Duncan paused, hoping for a response and got none. In the early days of the new city-state calendar, there once existed a city-state called Wilhelm, that no one knew about. The name left on the flame-bearer's pillar was its only evidence of existence. You guys summoned the Black Sun from history and succeeded there, so, the process to summon it is to pollute history, right? Duncan's imagination and memory were at their greatest when all the trivial clues and lines were put together. Things that were once incomprehensible and bizarre before now looked like concrete facts, and he's now certain he's getting closer than ever to the whole story. Ordering the ghostly flames to converge, he forms a circle to jail these 3 as he peered down at them menacingly. There should be more than a few of you who have infiltrated the city-state. Where are the others hiding? What are you going to do next? Continue to eliminate what you call loopholes? Or is it waiting for an opportunity to set off more pollution? Still refusing to answer, Duncan's questions were thrown out one by one, and finally, one of the cultists caved. The skinny maniac slowly flicked his lips into a snarling grin while slurring the words. We are not hitting in the so-called EDDC city-state. We are hitting in this cursed, T-twisted, long overdue H history. We need begens, it won't ENDD, what the flame bearers see can't do, you can't do, Mr. Captain. The grin on this cultist's mouth became deeper and deeper to the point it's derogatory. I just saw it now, your humanity, it's really dazzling. Where did you pick it up from? Duncan's eyes immediately got ugly as he stomped forward. What do you mean? Have a nice day, Mr. Captain. The Ender seemed to have flicked a switch there and became a well-mannered citizen instead of the batshit crazy fanatic from earlier. Ah, the Promised Land, the Promised Ark. Chapter 189 Inches Alice's Test. After that, Duncan never heard anything of value anymore from these Enders. All he got was their idiotic grin and silence while they took in the fresh salty air of the boundless sea. Nevertheless, the damage was done, and Duncan could no longer forget the last comment made by one of the captives about his humanity. Did they figure out the original Duncan is gone and someone else had taken over this shell? And these cultists mentioned they were not hiding in the city-state, but in a cursed history. What does that mean? Could it be that these crazy Enders are not usually in the normal time and space but rather hiding in another dimension? Duncan stared uncomfortably at these delirious fanatics, his mind rising up and down as he checked his ship for any changes. He's worried something might have happened without his knowledge. The goat head was still honestly driving the helm in the captain's room. That's good news. He didn't seem to be paying any attention to the deck, so it's unlikely the statue overheard the conversation. As for the other parts of the ship, everything's operating as usual without any strange anomalies. Now that leaves only Alice sitting on a large wooden barrel not far away with her head in hand. Miss Dahl was obviously a little bored before and had taken the liberty to comb her hair. After an unknown amount of time, Duncan finally exhaled a soft sigh after finding nothing. He's obviously wasted enough time on these cultists and was starting to get affected by their crazy words. I have already obtained a lot of useful information from these people. Any more time will only be wasted. Exactly then, one of the Enders froze again as if a switch got flipped. He looked up into the illusory sail above and spoke in a hallucinatory voice. Is it time to disembark? There is no place for you on this ship to begin with. Duncan glared at the captive with a deadpan expression, but you can still come in handy before I throw you overboard. Ads by PubFuture. Instead of unsettling the three Enders, the ghost captain's words only excited them with that creepy grin. Honestly, it unnerved even Duncan, who's fully in control of the situation. Alice, come here. Skillfully popping her head back on, Alice trotted to the ghost captain's side. Captain, you called me. Can you not pull your head off in the future? Your joints aren't good to begin with. If you keep removing your head, the connection will only get worse with time. Also, your intellect drops whenever you do that. Duncan lectures with a frown. I'm going to conduct a test now, so stop it. Test. Alice was stunned for a moment. What test? To see if your uncontrolled guillotine ability is still there. Duncan raised an eyebrow. Don't tell me you've forgotten about it. N-O-V-E in .c ohm. I forgot. Alice nodded reasonably. I just remembered it as soon as you reminded me. Then she ignored the subtle changes in Duncan's expression and greeted the three Enders. Hello, I forgot to introduce myself just now. My name is Alice, and I'm the ship's cook. You should tell them about your other identity, Duncan said lightly. But as he spoke, he didn't forget to catch the reaction from the three cultists. It's Anomaly 099. The eyes of the three Enders finally showed a huge change, and not for the better either. I thought you were all numb to the point of not being afraid of dying. Duncan smirked mischievously. I hope you madmen can enjoy my next arrangement for you all. What I want is simple. Stay near Alice and survive, or die by beheading. Alice suddenly leaned over and muttered after hearing that. Captain, you really look like a villain when you speak like that. In amazement, Duncan faced the puppet. Which side are you on? Ads by PubFuture. Death means nothing to us. One of the final Enders finally spoke while the two were discussing. It's just one more pause in the long journey. You stupid fools who have rejected the gift of subspace, obsessed with the obstructions of the real world, can never know the truth beyond life and death. Duncan quickly tugged at Alice's arm. Did you hear that? This is what you call a villain. Alice nodded. Oh. Duncan then looks up at the glowing rift in the night sky. How long have these guys been aboard so far? It's been hours, right? Alice thought for a while. My sense of time is quite accurate. A few hours. In other words, the guillotine's effective timing must have passed at least once. Duncan mused over what this implied, but no matter, we can conduct the next round of testing. The next round of testing? Alice blinked in confusion. How are we going to test them? Well, we can roughly be certain your guillotine ability has not taken effect yet. Whether that's due to the vanished or me being present is another matter, Duncan said as he swept his gaze across the three captives. After confirming their heads were still in place, in a few hours, after confirming another cycle had passed, I want you and these three to leave the vanished for a while. Alice became shocked at the plan. Temporarily leave the vanished. Where to? Miss Dahl promptly looked around the terrain and saw nothing but endless water around them. There's not a single piece of land in sight. Duncan didn't actually iron out that detail in his grand scheme. His initial plan was to have the group keep some distance from the ship and from a populated landscape to avoid unintended casualty. There are a few lifeboats on the side, and they're all in good condition. I'll put one down and you can ride aboard one of them during the experiment. Duncan stared into Alice's eyes. Don't worry, all you're doing is floating out at sea for a while. I'll have the Vanished waiting nearby and won't leave you behind. Miss Dahl immediately shrunk her neck at the unreliable arrangement. Do I have to drift across the sea again? I had psychological trauma for the first time. And the view of the sea is so poor at night. What if you lose me? What if a gust of wind causes a wave to sweep the lifeboat away? What if the boat capsized? Duncan didn't wait for the humiliating puppet to finish before interrupting her. Stop, stop. As if there are so many what ifs. I'll have I hover overhead to keep an eye on you, okay. But then again, what are you afraid of? When I threw you overboard the first time, you actually used your box as a raft to row back aboard. Even 8 cannonballs couldn't keep you away back then. Alice's nagging immediately sauntered at the reminder. Nevertheless, the doll kept peering out at the boundless sea with worry. If that's what you say, Captain, but don't lose me. Duncan, why do I get the feeling that this doll is getting more and more useless the longer she stays aboard the ship? She's nothing like the wave-riding surfer the first time we met. Chapter 190 inches gone like yesterday. With the giant rift known as the world's creation hanging overhead, the cold breeze of the ocean blowing against her skin, and the constant waves finally battering against the rowboat's side, Alice felt like she was in a dream. Of course, she didn't really know what a dream was since she had been asleep for so long. However, if she had to guess, this would be how it would feel to her if she were human, floating in a big place, her thoughts drifting away with the currents driving her to a different world. Oh, there's also the 3 Enders sitting across from her in the vessel, but that's unimportant since they're tied up like dumplings at the moment. From her view, these are very bad people, the worst of the worst. Alice didn't know any humans so far, but if she did, Miss Dahl most certainly wouldn't want to be friends with these folks. Are you afraid? After holding back for a decent amount of time, Alice finally couldn't resist starting a conversation. She's really uncomfortable sitting here by herself without anyone to talk to. Although she knew this was a safety test that had to be done before she operated in the human city, it's still unsettling to be off the Vanished park not far away in the distance. Stupid filth, clumsy shell, one of the Enders responded to the puppet's voice, his thin skeleton-like head slowly raised and stared into Alice's eyes. Your soul is pale and empty, and subspace will not take in. Alice was stunned by the rude response and took a moment to react. Hey, don't be rude to others. Unfazed, the Ender on the opposite side only let out a mirth of hoarse and ugly laughter that frightened Miss Dahl even further. No, vel, b, in dot c, ohm. Sulking at being disrespected, Alice shook her head to get rid of the bad mood. I'm not angry anymore. Ads by PubFuture. This caused the second Ender to glance up inquiringly. I shouldn't be angry since you can only protest like this. After all, it is you who is tied up and not me, and it is you who have to do this head-dropping test, not me. Captain said, one mustn't get carried away when you are riding the wind, otherwise you will capsize in the end. Despite the Enders acting all quiet and indifferent, the dolls still managed to catch the subtle changes in their body language. They were exchanging silent looks and moving their necks from time to time. This gives the impression that they're wondering why their heads are still intact. At least in Alice's eyes, that's how they were behaving. Actually, I am a little afraid, Alice said suddenly. I'm afraid your heads will suddenly fall off. Captain said I could decapitate people, which startled me because humans don't have the same ability as me. Their heads can't go back on afterward. Suddenly, the sound of flapping wings came from above and caught Alice's eye. She could tell it's I who had come to check on her. Next thing the doll knew, I had dropped a gorgeous wooden box next to the boat. My box! Alice cried out in surprise and immediately imagined the picture of being swept out of her home. However, she quickly noticed a small note sticking to the top. The guillotine ability may also be related to your wooden box. Send it for resting. Also, stop imagining you're going to be kicked off the ship again. Alice flipped the note up and down and couldn't understand what's written there. She's illiterate. Ads by PubFuture. But soon, she saw something else on the back of the note, a scrawled stick figure of her rowing back to the Vanished with a smiling face at the end. That she understood. At ease now, Alice casually fished the wooden box out of the water with her hand and threw it next to herself. Then turning to face the cultist sitting across from herself, "Are you hungry?" Naturally, Miss Doll didn't expect a response and only asked out of courtesy. "Although Captain said that you are people that deserve to die, he also said that he won't kill you if you can complete the test. He will instead send you back to the city-state, and then, what's it called?" The puppet lady was a little stuck as she tried to recall the wording. "Oh, to show the concern of an enthusiastic citizen worried for the city's safety, he said you're worth at least 7 bikes. What is a bicycle? Subspace will feed us, subspace will give us peace, subspace will bless the perished after all life comes to the promised end," one of the Enders muttered randomly as if to answer Alice's rambling. "We are walkers of the end, abandoning our cursed flesh and blood for the promise. Our minds are open and await the new world." Huh, that confused Alice. "What are you talking about?" No response came though, only a boring one-person conversation between Alice and her box. She couldn't be any happier when dawn finally came. Best of all, she didn't behead anyone. It's dawn. You are still alive. We can go back now." The celebratory words didn't affect the 3 captives, but the glimmer of light did. They looked up and made a creepy grin. "Oh, our day is over," the madman sighed softly and slowly turned his head to meet Alice's perfect jewel eyes. "Doll, we will meet again someday." Huh, Alice was stunned. "What do you mean by that? You can't just escape into thin air." Unfortunately, Miss Doll had spoken too soon. As the morning glow spread, the Enders' bodies were silently disappearing, fading into nothingness like phantoms of yesteryears. Alice popped her eyes in literal bafflement. Did they really just escape into thin air?